Today, we have an extremely important topic that revolves around the most important microbe in our body. And today, I brought on one of the top experts, Dr. William Davis. So, welcome, Doc. Thanks for being on here.
Thank you, Dr. Berg. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, so you wrote a whole book, primarily revolves around this one microbe, and I want to just dive right in. Your book is called Super Gut, which is a fascinating read. This microbe is called L. reuteri. Out of all the thousands of microbes in our gut, like what makes this stand out as more important than the other ones?
It's been around for 60 years. It's not like it was discovered last Tuesday, but it was not recognized just how powerful this microbe was. In fact, the first 40 years of research around this microbe centered mostly around what it did for babies. Well, that's important. But it was shown to reduce, for instance, regurgitation of breast milk or formula, reduce colic, that kind of fussy restlessness and crying that babies get. And that's about where it ended. Maybe it abbreviated the diarrhea after an antibiotic, but it really didn't go much farther than that until this group in Boston, MIT, stumbled upon some unusual effects because there had been some very preliminary cell culture type evidence, so very preliminary stuff that showed that reuteri might have anti-cancer effects, particularly in colon cancer. So this group, very smart, very excellent research, was exploring that question, and they started to see all these unexpected effects that they're like, what is going on here? They saw that the animals stayed young. They didn't get fat and lose their hair and stop mating. They played with each other. They groomed each other. They stayed slender with thick, rich fur. They saw that if they inflicted wounds, this is animals, this sounds awful, but when they inflicted wounds, healing time was cut in half. They showed that there was a dramatic rise in testosterone in elderly mice, a marked increase in growth hormone, an amplification of the immune response, so much so, as you recall, as you and I age, the thymus gland, right here beneath the sternum, shrinks starting at age 15. And
Yeah.
by age 70, it's almost gone. It's about 10% of its original volume and capacity to produce T cells that protect us from viruses and bacteria. And that's why older people can succumb to flu or pneumococcal pneumonia, but 18-year-olds typically don't.
And that's differentiates between it's not the thyroid, it's the thymus, which is a little lower. It's on top of the heart.
Exactly. It's the thymus gland, the seat of T cell immunity, of the immune response. Well, that's restored, and it's restored back to its original size in mice.
Wow.
No one's done that
Wow.
human study yet. So all these extraordinary observations in mice. And so I decided to get this microbe and play with it. But it was commercially available as tablets for infants. So the dosage for infants is very small. So I just simply reasoned, how do I increase it? Well, you take 100 tablets of the product, but it's a sugary product, so it's not very good. So I just simply amplified counts by making it as a yogurt. It's not yogurt, of course. It looks and smells like yogurt, kind of, but it's a way to amplify bacterial counts, in this case, 1,000-fold. And that's when I saw everything. This usually doesn't happen, as you know. If you see something in mice, it often doesn't translate to a human experience. But in this case, everything seen in mice, everything, every last observation seen in mice, I've been seeing in humans.
Wow. And as far as what percentage is this microbe in the Western world? I mean, it's kind of absent, right, in a great majority of the population?
Yes. So Dr. Gerhard Reuter, he's the German microbiologist who first isolated it in 1962 from the breast milk of a German breastfeeding mother. He said back then, it's easy to find. It's ubiquitous. It's in breast milk. It's in stool. It's easy to find. Well, his 40-year academic career, he made a number of comments that he's finding it increasingly difficult to find, such that by the 2000s, he could barely find it at all. That's been corroborated several times by others. We have a clinical study I'm proposing where we do several hundred people and see how many will corroborate that, and also correlate such to other biomarkers, because it's so crucial for overall health and youthfulness. But it's presumptively because lactobacillus reuteri, as well as other lactobacillus species, there's many of them, of course, are uniquely susceptible to common antibiotics. All it takes is a round of penicillin or ampicillin or amoxicillin that you may have taken years and years ago, and you've wiped out all the reuteri and thereby lost all its huge advantages.
Wow. I think you mentioned, I'm not sure if it was in your book, but it's like, was it 96% of the population doesn't really have very many left or?
Exactly right. The best estimates we have from recent evidence is about 4% of people, 1 in 25 people still
Wow.
have it. And so that means 24 out of 25 don't have it, have lost
Right.
this. As you recall, one of the great effects of this microbe, most microbes in the gastrointestinal microbiome colonize the colon, way, way
Right.
down, 24 feet down from the mouth. And that's where they're supposed to be. But reuteri is unique in that it has the unique capacity to colonize the small intestine.
Mm.
And that's where it takes up residence and produce natural antibiotics. And these natural antibiotics are effective in killing fecal microbes, which, as you know, is a huge problem now. This notion of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, what we say SIBO, SIBO, that is, fecal microbes like E. coli, etc., have colonized the small intestine where they don't belong, and they're very destructive when they do that. Well, is the loss of reuteri and maybe some related species that have this unique ability to colonize the small intestine and produce antibiotics of their own. And these are different than the antibiotics you get from the hospital, from the doctor. These are very selective antibiotics, unlike the stuff you get in the hospital, where it tends to be broad spectrum, wipes out everything. It's an atomic bomb for your GI tract. And so, is the loss of reuteri part of the reason why this has become an epidemic? That is, because explains why SIBO has become an epidemic. I believe it is.
Mhm. Yeah, because now we have no protection against these other microbes. So I guess it's called what's called a keystone microbe, right? Which is kind of it does more than just one thing. It kind of helps the whole ecosystem in that area, right? It kind of helps balance everything.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful?
It's
So if I
fascinating.
had SIBO and I took an antibiotic like Xifaxan, it just kills a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't start the process of restoration. So
Yes.
exactly right. You restore reuteri, maybe some other microbes, and it begins the process. Microbes are kind of like people. We don't live in isolation. We have partners and families and friends and neighbors and coworkers and communities. Microbes are the same way. So restoration of reuteri is that first step, not just in restoring reuteri, but in cultivating a healthy community of microbes.
And then now let's just dive right into one of the huge effects that I'm very excited about. It causes the body to increase that hormone oxytocin, which is kind of a hormone that people know about, you're bonding with your mother as a baby, but it does a little more than that, right? Oxytocin does a lot more. And of course, as we age, oxytocin goes down. But tell us a little bit about this oxytocin, what that does.
So it's a brain hormone from the hypothalamus that is released by when you restore reuteri. If we believe the animal evidence is about threefold, 300% or more. We've tried to corroborate that in humans. We're having a hard time with the assays, so that's a work in progress. Oxytocin, traditionally regarded as the hormone of love and empathy. It is that. You get this surge in oxytocin. You'll see this play out in people who either get reuteri by some means, like a probiotic preparation, or as the yogurt to higher counts. And people will say, I like my spouse better. I get along with my family better. Their foibles and quirks don't irritate me as much. I like my coworkers better. My favorite, I accept the opinions of other people more readily. I love that. Uh, but I also call oxytocin the hormone of shape and body composition. It determines where your muscle is and how much you have. It also determines where fat is located. So it has a huge effect on your shape. Shape is a big thing. People say weight loss, but I like to tell people, let's go a step further than weight loss because, the GLP agonist world has highlighted what a flawed area that is. You lose fat, and by the way, with the GLP agonist, you lose
You
subcutaneous,
talk about Ozempic, right?
like
Yeah.
Ozempic, all those things. Those are selective for fat beneath the skin, not the
Mhm.
fat in your abdomen. And that's a problem because the most problematic form of fat, as you know, is the abdominal fat.
Mhm.
And of course, the GLP-1 agonists lead to loss of muscle, huge losses of muscle. And we know with excellent long-term evidence, when you lose muscle, you die younger.
Mhm.
Several years typically, as well as your last years tend to be characterized by frailty, falls, fractures, dementia, etc. So the loss of muscle is critical. Yet the FDA approved a class of drugs that permits huge loss of muscle. So preserving muscle during any effort to lose weight is absolutely critical so you don't experience those awful effects, and including early mortality. And oxytocin determines how much muscle you have. Personally, so I'm in my late 60s. When I was in my early 60s, when I started doing these things, specifically reuteri, I gained 13 pounds of muscle and my strength increased by 50% over 3 weeks. I don't know about you, Dr. Berg. I hate the gym. I can't stand going here. So I go once a week for 15 minutes. Get the heck out of there. Yet, despite that meager effort, I gained 13 pounds and 50% increase. I was doing lat pull downs, for instance, 10 repetitions at 130 pounds. Over 3 weeks, 15 minutes a week, I was doing 200 pounds.
Wow.
So, and that's been borne out also by the animal experimental data. And what I see in real life is this rest. Now, here's a quirky thing though. Those of us who had more muscle in our youth tend to regain more muscle. So if you're a long distance runner, had skinny, you won't gain as much, say, as somebody who was a wrestler or a weightlifter or a shot put through, that kind of a thing.
And when you first told me that, I was like, is that actually true? So I have not changed my workout. When I started this, probably was it been about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months ago, I went from 185 to 192 or 193 and not fat. I'm definitely gaining muscle, which I am like, wow. It's just as wild because it's like I'm not adding more workouts or anything. So this is a game changer. In fact, I even told my parents, my father lost a lot of muscle mass. So he's doing it. First of all, his hair's coming back. He's gaining more weight. And this is like a game changer, especially with age-related muscle loss.
But also, it keeps you independent. You're more likely to be able to bound upstairs, get in and out of your car with ease, go for long walks, ride your bike, and not succumb to loss of independence and end up in an assisted living center. So preserving muscle is a huge event. And in guys, of course, there's a marked increase in testosterone just from that. And ladies experience a preservation or increase in bone density. So it's part of the formula for combating all the effects of aging.
Yeah. Huge. I want to go back to this empathy word because this, I want people to understand what that word means, because I looked it up and got a little more data, looked at the derivation of it. And it really boils down to being able to, the ability to see someone's viewpoint, which is like, wow, if someone could do that, they're not going to get in an argument with their spouse, because that's really the anatomy of an argument. Like the person's unwilling to see someone's viewpoint, right? Even in social interactions, if you can't see the viewpoint, you're just going to go back and forth. This is huge. And so I just want to tell you what happened to me. So I didn't really expect too much, but I would say a week after taking this, and we'll just call it maybe a cultured probiotic, not a yogurt, because it's a little bit different. And we'll talk about how to make it in a second. But I didn't really notice anything except my wife says, "What has gotten into you?" I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You want to hug me like 5 times a day and you want to snuggle." And I'm like, I know, it's weird. I don't know what's gotten over me. She goes, "Keep eating that yogurt," right? So, I mean, it's just really interesting. And I just had another response with one of my staff members. And I said, because she's doing the yogurt, I said, you feel any changes? She goes, "I don't know, but other people are nicer to me." I said, "Are you sure it's other people? Maybe it's just your viewpoint of other people." She goes, "Yeah, it could be." Because like everywhere she goes, like she's just like very interested in the other person. I mean, that's like nowadays, this is such an important thing. I mean, could you imagine if more people had that ability? What's really bizarre about this is that I think that having this full microbiome creates a natural amount of oxytocin. This is not something new. It's like something we had at one time and I think we had lost, right? So it's not something that we're adding to the human race. It's just something that's lost along the way from these antibiotics and other things.
I think about that a lot, Dr. Berg, because I remind myself that we live at a time of record social isolation. Yes, pandemic, but even pre-pandemic. Record suicide. Likewise, pre-pandemic, there was a 35% increase in suicide. Of course, half of all marriages end in divorce. And the psychology community has been measuring and tabulating measures of narcissistic behavior since 1963. And the increase has been dramatic. So There's lots of things at work here, social media and other things. And you and I don't have much control. Your listeners don't have control over that, perhaps, but we do have control over this microbe and thereby the capacity to boost oxytocin. And I'm seeing exactly what you're describing. People like other people better. They get along better. Dr. Paul Zak he calls himself a neuroeconomist in LA. And he did something crazy. He went to the jungles of New Guinea
Mm.
and found a tribe who had never seen Western people before. So painted 2 generations away from cannibalism.
Wow.
And he says the first thing you encounter when you enter their camp is the stink of unwashed humans because there's no running water. But they were
Mm.
friendly and embracing, and they welcomed them. What he wanted to do was check the oxytocin blood levels before and after this ritual dance they do. Well, he did, and he showed no rise, so he never published the data, but he mentioned it in a book about oxytocin. So I called him. I said, Paul, I see you didn't publish that yet. Would you share it with me? He very generously did. And I compared those levels. This is a group of people unexposed to antibiotics, glyphosate, herbicides, all that stuff. And I have data of my own compared. It's hard to compare, but you can kind of get a crude sense. And it was clear that primitive people have much higher levels of oxytocin because they still have reuteri, and they've been studied for the presence of reuteri. They all have it, as do wild animals, but we've lost it.
Wow.
And so we see lower levels in humans, modern humans.
And I think we get it from our mother with breast milk. And how many kids don't get breast milk anymore? That could be a big problem too, right?
There's that. Mom got antibiotics at time of
Mhm.
delivery. She probably got it many times over her lifetime, probably couldn't give it to the child. And the child gets antibiotics at delivery and gets antibiotics, thousands of antibiotic prescriptions for every 1,000 children every year. And so we've wiped out reuteri and
Mhm.
other microbes because antibiotics are kind of stupid. They're necessary, but it's like an atom bomb. If we drop a nuclear bomb on a population, it doesn't only pick the bad people. It picks out the children, the women, college
Mm.
professors, the social work. It kills everybody.
Yeah, and I think the myth is that people think, oh, if you take an antibiotic, it all comes back for a couple of weeks. Yeah, you're going to be back to where you were a couple of weeks later, right? I don't think that's true.
Absolutely not. It's quite clear. Now, the tough question is how much can we restore? That's a work
Yeah.
in progress. And that's why I think this idea of restoring these, what you're saying is keystone microbes, is so important as compared to, say, an antibiotic. If antibiotics got us here, how can another round of antibiotics be part of the solution? And of course, the use of fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut,
Mhm.
veggies you ferment on your kitchen counter like cucumbers, another spectacular way. Though the crazy thing about that is those microbes in fermented foods are not the ones that colonize the GI tract. They somehow cross feed, they provide nutrients to beneficial microbes and they bloom. So you get a
Wow.
bloom in all the beneficial species, particularly ones that produce the fatty acid butyrate that yield such effects as healing of the intestinal lining, reduction in blood sugar, blood pressure, depression, anxiety, deeper sleep, a restoration of youthful childlike dreams,
Oh, yeah.
flying, showing up at the school play in your underwear and not knowing your lines.
How did you know I had that dream?
All that stuff comes back.
Wow. Yeah, talk about vivid dreams. That's one thing that stands out, and definitely my sleep is much better. You have a lot of people that have either rosacea or a lot of skin issues, and I know that's gut related. And I know there's some technical parts of that, like there's, I guess byproducts of bacteria dying, which I don't want to get too technical, but just in a simple way, how do you explain what's happening between your gut and your skin?
A lot of that wisdom is unfolding. But I break down skin rashes into 2 categories. The simple skin rashes, that is due to a disruption of the skin microbiome. Acne would be a good example of that. But then the more complex conditions like rosacea and psoriasis tend to start in the gut. So, in other words, if I give somebody a drug that blocks some pathway, like an inflammatory marker, all you do is block the inflammatory marker and get partial response. But that person still has SIBO and SIFO and is thereby subject to long term consequences like colon cancer, ulcerative
Mhm.
colitis, diverticular disease, weight gain, obesity, on and on and on. So the pharmaceutical model is so deeply flawed, but it's
Mhm.
so deeply ingrained into common practice. But this is what they do in common practice. They give you a blocker of some pathway. That all said, it's not entirely clear what the path is to restore a healthy microbiome, say in somebody with rosacea. But I'm seeing it happen. That is, do these basic things. What I love about the microbiome things we're doing is that we're getting away from the pharmaceutical model, which is if you have pneumococcal pneumonia, kill it. If you have a staphylococcal abscess, kill it.
Right.
Well, there's nothing specific for those pathogens. So let's instead, the microbiome has a great amount of wisdom built into it, as you know. So if we restore those keystone microbes that help us, take care of it for you. You just have to
Mhm.
provide the basic building blocks for them to do that.
Do you believe from your experience, like these people that have these food allergies and sensitivities, they can improve that by restoring the microbes in the gut?
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? I see it over and over and over again. People say, I can't eat FODMAPs or
Mhm.
legumes or nightshades or histamine containing foods or fructose. Oh, I only can eat 7 foods.
Right.
Or they had IgG testing, food intolerance testing.
Yeah.
I can't eat these 43 foods. And I
Right.
see all this go away. And the science is evolving. This is SIBO. It's fecal microbes living in the small intestine. Small intestine is very permeable by design. Very thin mucus barrier, single layer, very thin intestinal lining, and it's permeable. That's where we're supposed to absorb all our nutrients. But when fecal microbes invade that small intestine, 24 feet, trillions of microbes that live and die rapidly, it inflames the intestinal wall and it makes it even more permeable and lets all kinds of stuff through, including bacterial breakdown products. This process of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and consumption of wheat, the gliadin protein wheat, is a lethal combination that essentially
Mhm.
guarantees you are going to get fat, diabetic, experience dementia, and have all kinds of other conditions. The neglect of this issue in conventional care, the haphazard administration of antibiotics, and the awful, awful advice to cut your cholesterol, saturated fat, eat more healthy whole grains, and everything in moderation is is a recipe for absolute disaster. That's what we're seeing, of course, playing out around, and that's why you and I have so much to do every day.
It's incredible. I mean, if you just take a look at a typical conventional GI doctor, right? You go to the doctor and you have bloating. Wow, they're going to go through the evaluation and you're going to end up with some medication that is just going to manage it to somewhat, but then it gets worse. I mean, like, could you imagine if they just had some awareness of what's happening in the gut and actually restore more of the root cause? I mean, it's obvious to me, but I think it's just about getting more awareness out there. It's honestly, I don't know how much we can change the medical profession, but we can actually educate the person on the street so they can make their own choices. What you did is you had this wild idea. I'm gonna turn this into a yogurt. You took it and you mixed it with a fiber. Kind of just describe what you did to grow this.
As I mentioned, I got the original microbe and the lactobacillus reuteri, but it was present at such low count. It was 100 million of 2 strains, which sounds like a lot if it was money, but in microbes, it's relatively trivial. So
Mhm.
I reasoned, how could I increase it without having to take 100 tablets, which would be absurd? So I simply fermented it. Of course, microbes don't have sex. There's no male and female microbes. They just double themselves. Well, lactobacillus reuteri doubles every 3 hours or so at human body temperature. So I simply fermented it for 36 hours, uh, 12 doublings. I also added prebiotic fiber. It's kind of like adding cow manure to your garden. You know this on your farm. If you add cow manure or other fertilizer, you get bigger tomatoes and cucumbers. So I did the same kind of thing. And we did quantify. We quantified number of microbes at 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours. And by sheer dumb luck, I happened to pick the magic number, the best number, which is 36 hours. When you go longer than 36 hours, you start to get more death of microbes. Dead microbes are still beneficial, but not as beneficial as live microbes. And so you get this big ramp up in counts. We get somewhere around 300 billion. So we start with millions, hundreds of millions. Now we get hundreds of billions. So we get a thousand-fold increase over the original number. We did this using something called flow cytometry, and we count the microbes. And so that was the key to, I
Mhm.
believe, Now, if we had done it as a probiotic, one of the difficulties with probiotics, I formulate probiotics, is they're very expensive if you want to put a whole bunch into a capsule, say. So, in other words, if you wanted to put 300 billion lactobacillus reuteri into a capsule, it costs consumers like $300 or $400 a month. It'd be ridiculous. No one wants to do that. So, you can buy the capsules at lower counts at an affordable cost. You amplify the counts through fermentation, like the yogurt. And by the way, it doesn't have to be dairy. It can be coconut milk, can be salsa, can be hummus.
Salsa.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, pico de gallo.
Wow.
And but dairy is so forgiving and so available and so familiar to so many people, and it's easy to do.
Yeah.
So we do that. We get 300 billion counts per half cup or 120 milliliters serving. And I think that's why we saw such extravagant effects in pushing back SIBO, because we're coming at this with very high counts sufficient to overcome the trillions
Yeah.
of fecal microbes of SIBO.
Yeah. You also shared with me another idea, which
Mm.
I think is brilliant. There's a certain microbe. You can get this probiotic right at Walmart, the drugstore, and then you could take a capsule of it. There's a very specific, very well researched microbe in there that you could, I guess you mix it with fruit juice for 72 hours. You put it outside, right? And then you maybe put some top on it. You don't want to tighten it up because it'll explode, but then you're basically making your own soda because the microbe will eat a lot of the sugar. And it's a brilliant idea. I mean, like, what a great drink. It's kind of like kombucha, but it actually has microbes in it.
Many of us miss juice. It
Yeah.
was nice to have mango juice and cherry juice and all the pomegranate juice, but they're so high in sugar that they're
Yeah.
awful for you.
Yeah.
Well, here's a way to have the microbe consume the sugar, and you can consume it down to zero. So the final product is no longer sweet,
Wow.
but it's effervescent. So this
Wow.
microbe is so we make wine and beer, for instance, with Saccharomyces cerevisiae.
That's in here, the microbe.
Well, its cousin, Saccharomyces boulardii, the
Oh,
cousin.
sorry. Yeah. Okay. This is a similar cousin.
And it is a spectacular fermenter if you put it in the juice. So what I do is a capsule into juice, any volume of juice, but you have to be careful. The juice can't contain potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate or other preservative.
Mm.
And then, as you say, cap it lightly because you'll see it 24 hours. It's bubbling like a cauldron because it's producing carbon dioxide. And if you cap it too tightly, you'll literally have a mess in your kitchen. So we keep it light. You can vent it. You can even go to these beer brewing stores and they have venting caps for like $3. You can do that too. But you leave it on your kitchen counter for at least 48 hours. Test it. We have this wonderful sugar sensing device in our mouth called a tongue. We can taste it. And if it's sweet, let it go another 12, 24 hours. You want it not sweet. You and I don't want sugar. Your listeners don't want sugars. But you drink this, it's probably one of the most important things people can do.
Wow.
If you need a course of antibiotics, let's say one of your listeners says, well, they're going to put an implant in my mouth. They're going to use prophylactic antibiotics. Or I had a terrible skin infection, whatever. And you have to have an antibiotic. Well, you can drink this juice like a quarter, half cup, couple, 3 times a day. And it's the most important thing you can do to at least partially protect the integrity of your gastrointestinal microbiome. Nothing is fully protective against antibiotics, but it's the best we have.
If you haven't bought that book, Super Gut, get that book right now. You also, on your website, you have a really great ongoing program that people can participate in. You coach them and things like that. I'm going to put your link down below so people can know about that. But I just wanted to have you on just to really talk about this one microbe that's so important. And I appreciate you coming on. And then what I want to do is roll right into kind of a video of how a person could make this microbe. And so don't click off yet. You can just watch that and you can make notes. And I'm going to put your stuff in a description. But thank you so much for coming on, Doc. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Dr. Berg. Always.
So this is very simple how we make this. We're going to take the probiotic, 1 capsule, and then we will open it up. And then we're going to take inulin. This is a tablespoon. Take organic half and half, just to make a paste. Mix it up really good. Don't put too much of that half and half in there right off the bat, just about 2 tablespoons. And then we can pour the rest of this half and half in there, 1 quart. I'm going to mix this up really good. I'm going to take a container, 2 containers, and we'll pour some of this in here. Even it out pretty good. Okay, we're putting this mixture into the yogurt maker. We have 2 of them, right? Very carefully. Okay, now we have to add water to it. So we got water right here. So I'm going to pour the water like so. And I want that level to be at the same level as the mixture inside the containers. So I'm looking to see if it's the same mixture, and yes, it is. So we now have the water at the level of a little bit more than I wanted, so that's fine. Okay, here's the next part, and of course, if you have a different machine, you're going to have to just do the same type of thing. On the left, we have temperature and time, so we can press this once, okay? And then we want this at 99 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're going to bring this down, okay? And then press start on that. And then now, what we're going to do, we have 8 hours. We're going to go up to 36 hours, okay? And then we press start again. And guess what? We're done. We're going to put the top on it, and then we're going to wait for 36 hours. And then after that's done, we are going to then put it in the refrigerator for storage. Okay, we're pulling it out of the refrigerator after 36 hours and leaving it in the refrigerator for a couple hours to cool down. And now we're going to consume a half of a cup of this every single day. I like to have mine before bed. It's amazing. It's rich. It's delicious. You can add berries to it. If you need to add a sweetener, go ahead. But I think you'll find it quite delicious. A half a cup a day.